With Hill 107 in their hands, the German paratroopers finally met their objective. Instead of being wiped out by the superior Commonwealth and Greek troops, now they had a secure western airstrip of Maleme airfield, safe for the takeoff and landing. The first planes carrying ammunition and supplies began to arrive during the morning of May 21st. After receiving news of Luftlandesturmregiment's success at Malame's, General Student decided to redirect all reinforcements to the west. The first paratroopers landed in the morning to reinforce the Luftlandesturmregiment. Oberst Bernhard Ramk was among them. He took command of the Luftlandesturmregiment and began to organize the defense of the airfield. By the end of the day, an air bridge between Greece and Maleme has been established. The fleet of U-52 transport planes began to arrive, carrying with them the first troops of the 100th Regiment of the 5th Mountain Division. The 20 transport planes landed every hour, despite the periodic mortar fire from the New Zealand positions. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, General Freiberg began to organize a counterattack to regain Maleme airfield. Instead of quick action, Freiberg spends a whole, crucial day organizing his troops. Intelligence reports he received before the German invasion were completely accurate. Among the reports was the information about the German plan to transport the troops by the sea. Freiberg misinterpreted this report and expected the main attack to come from the sea, while he perceived the airborne invasion as nothing more than a diversion. For that reason, he tied most of his troops to protect the coastline, instead of committing them to fight the paratroopers. It is why the German paratroopers were not run over on the first day of the invasion, although they operated with heavy losses in an area where the defenders were much more numerous. It was also the reason why the 23rd Battalion and the neighboring 28th Maori Battalion were not sent to assist the 22nd Battalion in defending the airport. To avoid Luftwaffe bombardment and because of the delay in the organization, the counterattack was scheduled for the night, from 21st to 22nd May. The 20th New Zealand Battalion advanced from the north, the 28th Maori Battalion was in the middle, while 21st Battalion pushed from the south, towards Hill 107. By the time the counterattack began, Germans have transported and deployed the complete 100th Regiment of the 5th Mountain Division in the defense. With the reinforced Luftlandesturmregiment and almost the whole 100th Regiment, the Germans were too strong. The New Zealand troops made some progress reaching the airfield, but eventually, the counterattack failed. With the night counterattack, a series of courageous actions, carried out by the platoon leader of the 20th New Zealand Battalion, 2nd Lieutenant Charles Upham, began. For his actions during the Battle of Crete, Lieutenant Upham will receive the Victoria Cross. We will meet Charles Upham again. After all, this was only the first Victoria Cross he received. Meanwhile, on the sea, a tragedy was happening. Although the Germans had an airport under control, they continued with the plan and sent a part of the troops to Crete by sea. Convoys with the elements of the 5th Mountain Division left Greece on May 19. However, Royal Navy was waiting for them. On the night of May 21, the Royal Navy fleet, consisted of 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers, intercepted the first German convoy, heading to Crete. German troops were boarded on small transport ships, escorted by only 1 Italian destroyer. Despite valiant effort of Italian destroyer, the convoy was completely destroyed, with only 250 men saved from the sea. The second convoy was intercepted during the morning of the 22nd of May. This time, with the help of Luftwaffe bombers and timely intervention of the escort destroyer, convoy with troops managed to escape back to Greece. Throughout the Battle of Crete, the British Royal Navy and Luftwaffe fought hard. The Royal Navy was determined to prevent any ships to reach the island, while on the other hand, Luftwaffe was equally determined to prevent them from doing so. Under constant air attacks, Royal Navy successfully carried out its mission. The cost of the mission was high. During the battle, the Royal Navy lost 3 cruisers and 6 destroyers, while many more valuable ships were damaged. Elsewhere on the Crete, paratroopers took defensive positions, and the battle slowly reached a stalemate. The troops of both sides, over time, become exhausted from constant attacks and counterattacks. On May 23, the Germans began an offensive to break out from Maleme. By that time, they had a significant force at their disposal. Troops were divided into 3 Kampfgruppe. The Luftlanders Sturm Regiment and other paratroopers that came as reinforcements on May 21 formed Kampfgruppe Ramp. The mission of Kampfgruppe Ramp was to advance on the north side of the Crete, along the coastline. The elements of the 100th and 85th Regiment, 5th Mountain Division, under the command of Oberst Willibald Utz, formed Kampfgruppe Utz. The Kampfgruppe Utz advanced from the right flank. The 3rd Kampfgruppe consisted of an engineer battalion under Major Schatt, with the task to protect the airfield. Opposite them stood the already exhausted troops of the 5th New Zealand Brigade. The progress was slow at first. The Germans encountered well-defended New Zealand positions. Eventually, Battle Group Utz linked up with the 3rd Regiment of the 7th Airborne Division. In fear of being surrounded, the New Zealand troops pulled back. By May 24, a steady stream of men and supplies gave the Germans even more advantage. To the surprise of the defenders, the Germans successfully transferred artillery pieces by air. Mostly 7.5 cm recoilless guns. Now, besides the air superiority, they could also count on the artillery support. On the evening of May 24, Germans had reached a new defensive line, around the village of Galatos, just a few kilometers southwest of Harnia. After bitter hand-to-hand fighting on the streets and houses, followed by series of attacks and counterattacks, Galatas eventually fell on May 25. After the fall of Galatas, it became clear to everyone that Crete cannot be held. The organization of the Commonwealth defense steadily began to collapse. Officers at the headquarters lost the track of what unit is retreating, and what unit still holds the line. Fragile communication lines presented a permanent problem throughout the battle, and it became even more prominent as the Germans approached Harnia. As the defense began to crumble, Freiburg sends troops held in reserve to move westward, and replace the exhausted 5th New Zealand Brigade. The reserve consisted of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, Northumberland Hussars, a light artillery unit used as the infantry, and the 1st Battalion, the Rangers. As they reach their positions, just west of Harnia, they realize that no one is protecting their left flank. By May 27, these units will be cut off from the main force, and eventually destroyed. Meanwhile, Freiburg informed the High Command in Cairo that Crete is lost and requested evacuation. After receiving approval, the main body of the Crete force began to retreat towards Sfakia, a small village on the south coast. To protect the road for withdrawing troops, Freiburg established a defensive line west of the village of Suda, along an area known as 42nd Street. The Germans were constantly bringing new troops to the island. On May 27, they already had 5 regimental-size battle groups in the western part of Crete. Kampfgruppe Ramp, Kampfgruppe Utz and the 3rd Regiment of the 7th Airborne Division encircled Commonwealth Reserve troops in Harnia, while the 141st Regiment and 85th Regiment of the 5th Mountain Division moved to the east. The first contact with the new defensive line along 42nd Street did not end well for the Germans. Forward elements of the 141st Regiment came across the defensive line, around 11 am, on May 27. As soon as the Germans approached the line, the commander of the 27 Australian Infantry Battalion ordered a bayonet charge. Soon they were joined by troops from the neighbouring 2nd Australian Infantry Battalion, and the 28th Maori Battalion. The Germans were forced to retreat, losing more than half of the men in the fierce battle. Further advance of the 141st and 85th Regiments was halted. Success in the Battle of 42nd Street gave some valuable time to the retreating Commonwealth troops. It was also the first of the series of rearguard battles on the road to Sfakia. To get to Sfakia, men had to climb the Cretan mountains and descend towards the south side of the island, using the narrow road unsuitable for the vehicles. In the meantime, in Heraklion, the final preparation for the evacuation has been made. On the evening of May 28, men of the British 14th Infantry Brigade began to board the Royal Navy ships. Everything was done in secrecy, as ships had to evacuate troops during the night, undetected. However, on the morning of May 29, Luftwaffe bombers found Royal Navy ships, packed with soldiers, on the way to Egypt. During the evacuation from Heraklion, Royal Navy lost 2 destroyers, while all other ships were damaged, and 800 men of the 14th Infantry Brigade lost their lives. The German paratroopers in the area were completely unaware of what was going on in Heraklion. On the morning of May 29, German patrols entered deserted Heraklion, unopposed. In the Rethymno area, Australians still held their positions firmly. From the first day, men of the 19th Australian Infantry Brigade had the battle under control. In all the chaos that happened on the west, the information about withdrawal from the Crete failed to reach Lieutenant Colonel Campbell. On May 29, the bulk of the 5th Mountain Division reached Rethymno, and began to advance toward the airfield. After heavy fighting, Australian defenders surrendered. At Sfakia, retreating troops formed defensive perimeter. Evacuation from Sfakia began on May 28, and it was a difficult task, much more difficult than a similar action carried out 1 year ago at Dunkirk. Besides this, Luftwaffe air superiority forced Royal Navy to board the troops, only during the night. As the number of sunken and damaged ships increased, on June 1, the Royal Navy decided to stop the further evacuation. The troops left on the island did not have any other choice, but to surrender to the advancing Germans. The Battle of Crete was a great gamble, which eventually paid off. Although the chances of success for the Germans were slim during the initial phase of the invasion, mostly because of a slow reaction and poor decision-making of the Commonwealth commanders, they eventually achieved success. Constant Luftwaffe bombardment also played a major role in the German victory. However, Luftwaffe was not so selective as they, on few occasions, bombed the German troops on the ground. The price of the victory was high. Germans suffered over 6,500 casualties, of which 3,350 were killed. 1/3 of U-52 transport planes used in operation were destroyed or damaged. Out of 32,000 Commonwealth troops on the island, 1,700 were killed, and almost 12,000 surrenders. During the battle, German paratroopers executed hundreds of Cretan civilians. Because of the high casualties suffered by the paratroopers, during the Battle of Crete, the Germans abandoned the idea of the large-scale airborne assaults. Although Germans formed a few more airborne divisions by the end of the war, they only used them as infantry. The Germans never exploited the offensive capabilities of Crete, turning Crete into a strictly defensive barrier towards Greece and the Balkans.